Hello and welcome to News Central TV. My name is Mazino Appeal. Now here are stories making headlines beyond the continent. We begin with the office clash between US and Ukraine, where President Volodymyr Zelensky on Tuesday said he wanted to make things right with Donald Trump and to work under the US president's strong leadership to secure a lasting peace in Ukraine. In his first public comment since Trump halted U.S. military aid to Ukraine, Zelensky called for a truce in the sea and sky as a first step to ending the three-year war and pledged to sign a key minerals deal with Washington. A dramatic collapse in the Kiev-Washington wartime alliance has played out publicly since an Oval Office clash between Zelensky and Trump last week, crescendoing with Ukraine's top ally suspending crucial military aid. Trump's stunning decision Monday to halt aid to Ukraine deepened fears in Kiev and many European capitals that America was pivoting away from its allies and towards Moscow. Now, similarly, Ukrainian Prime Minister says the country sought to maintain bonds with Washington after President Donald Trump ordered U.S. military aid deliveries be suspended following a public clash with President Volodymyr Zelensky. Trump's stunning decision strengthened fears in Ukraine and in many European capitals that America was pivoting away from its allies and towards Moscow. Denis Shmyhal said U.S. is an important partner and is absolutely determined to continue cooperation with Washington. The Prime Minister's outreach followed Trump's decision, which sent shockwaves across Ukraine, but which was also hailed by Moscow.
Продовжити співпрацю з Сполученими Штатами Америки і впевнений, що підтримка від Сполучених Штатів як від світового лідера, одного з найбільших наших партнерів, який нас підтримував протягом 3 років, буде продовжуватись. Ми шукаємо ці можливості кооперації прагматичної, базуючись на економічних, зокрема і угоді про спільне створення інвестиційного фонду в Україні. Ми готові її підписувати, будемо рухатись в цьому напрямку. США є важливим військовим, фінансовим, політичним партнером України і важливо зберегти це партнерство, важливо знайти шляхи, ми над цим працюємо зараз активно, спільної роботи над досягненням миру. Україна, як ніхто, хоче справедливого і такого забезпеченого гарантіями безпеки, твердого миру для нашої держави, для європейського континенту.
To discuss more on this, we are joined by Professor Mukesh Kapila. He's an author and senior humanitarian. Mr. Mukesh, you're welcome. Thank you very much for joining us again this evening. Hello, Mr. Mukesh. I'm hoping you can hear us.
Yes, I can hear you.
Fantastic.
Good to join you.
Great. Thank you very much. Now, what are the potential ramifications of the U.S. reducing support for Ukraine on border, or rather broader global alliances?
I think all countries and continents have to review their relationship with the United States. And the most strategic consideration is that just because you've got a past agreement or an arrangement that sometimes has been going on for decades, doesn't mean to say that it's going to remain. So basically, all past agreements are subject to review. And at the core of the review is really a matter of American interest. If the American interest has changed, if the American interest is not sufficiently represented economically in particular, then I think the alliance that you as a country have made probably is not going to be sustained by the Trump administration. So it has a fundamental impact in terms of relationships of countries with the United States.
As European powers ramp up support for Ukraine, could this prompt African nations to maybe reevaluate their relationship with both the EU and the US, especially in terms of security and economic aid?
I think the African nations should have done that a long time ago, quite honestly. Africa as a continent has become too dependent on the West, whether it is Europe or whether it's the United States, in terms of its economic needs, in terms of trade, and many other considerations. That's definitely on peace and security. When it should have been doing much more to help itself, it has become dependent on the outside world. So most certainly this is a wake-up call for Africans to retitrate the relationships with external powers, and also, therefore, it implies that they should retitrate relationships within the continent, on the continent, and including regional organizations like the African Union.
And given Zelensky's appeal for Trump's strong leadership and also truce, how might this influence perceptions of U.S. leadership in global peace processes? That's including in regions like Africa, where peace building is a significant focus.
Well, I wish peace building was a sufficient focus in Africa, because actually what we see is unresolved wars and conflicts everywhere, whether it's in Congo or in Sudan or elsewhere. Now, I think what Trump has done is brought the focus on peace, which is welcome. But his way of making peace and the transactional gains and benefits that implies is something that African leaders should be very wary of. What are African states willing to give up in order to get the United States involved in the making of the peace? Because have no delusion about this one. If the Americans get involved and show leadership in peacemaking in Africa, they will extract a price, which can definitely mean an economic price. It'll also be a political price in terms of alignment with the Americans on a whole range of geopolitical issues, and whether or not African states want to give up their sovereignty to that purpose is something that each nation must consider very seriously in its own context.
And so how might African countries now, I mean, many of which are heavily reliant on U.S. military support for regional peacekeeping operations, how might they react to a potential shift in U.S. foreign policy towards Russia or reduced engagement in global conflict zones?
Well, I think, quite frankly, if there is a Russian-American rapprochement, then it's a good thing for the world as a whole, because the conflict between the Western powers, basically led by the United States, against Russia, the tensions with Russia and the tensions with China, is a major geopolitical driver of global conflict. Even if you don't have a war, there is conflict. So in that sense, if the superpowers can work better together, maybe the Security Council will be more effective. And maybe they can work together to bring about peace in continents like Africa. Having said that, if Africans were to lose their own agency to do that, and if it means selling their own interest just to keep either the Russians or the Americans happy, or the Chinese for that matter, then I think it's bad news for Africans. So I think this is, the glass is half full here. So maybe a chapter on peace is going to be opened for the world. But unless Africans are very savvy about protecting their own national interests, I don't think this is going to end well for them, especially if peace is imposed from outside. Just like as Americans are trying to impose peace on Ukraine by asking Ukraine to do certain things, which may or may not be in Ukraine's longer-term interests. Hence, the Africans need to be extremely wary about this. And meanwhile, they must strengthen their own economic and military capacities so that they're not entirely reliant on outside powers.
Well, Professor Mukesh Kapila, I want to say thank you very much for joining us this evening. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
In the meantime, the World Health Organization has pledged to persist in its missions despite substantial funding cuts resulting from the United States' recent decision to withdraw from the organization. Now, this move has led to a significant reduction in financial support affecting various global health initiatives. WHO spokeswoman Margaret Harris acknowledged that certain programs have been directly impacted by the funding cuts, notably the Global Measles Surveillance Network, which was entirely financed by the United States. Margaret emphasized the organization's determination to continue providing necessary assistance regardless of the number of programs affected by funding cuts.
Basically, we continue our work. Our work is to ensure that the highest level of health is achieved by all people, and changes in funding, changes in donation, of course, are big challenges. But as the Director General said, we have broadened and looked at broadening our funding base. We've gone through transformation, and we won't let the people of the planet down. We just have to be more innovative. We have to talk to different partners, and we're doing all that.
Let's talk about Trump's tariff wars. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says that Canada is responding with retaliatory tariffs of 25% against the United States as huge U.S. tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China kick in. Trump had announced that then paused blanket 25% tariffs on imports from major trading partners, Canada and Mexico, in February, accusing them of failing to stop illegal immigration and drug trafficking. He pushed ahead with them Tuesday, citing a lack of progress on both fronts. Trump also inked an order Monday to increase a previously imposed 10% tariff on China to 20%, piling atop existing levies on various Chinese goods.
The U.S. tariffs came into effect in the early hours of this morning, and so did the Canadian response. Canada will be implementing 25% tariffs against $155 billion worth of American goods, starting with tariffs on $30 billion worth of goods immediately, and tariffs on the remaining $125 billion of American products in 21 days' time. They've chosen to launch a trade war that will, first and foremost, harm American families. They've chosen to sabotage their own agenda that was supposed to usher in a new golden age for the United States. And they've chosen to undermine the incredible work we've done together to tackle the scourge that is fentanyl, a drug that must be wiped from the face of the earth.
Similarly, Mexico will hit back at U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs with retaliatory duties of its own. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum disclosed this on Tuesday, accusing Washington of defamatory claims against her government. Speaking at a news conference, she said there is no justification for Trump to impose the 25% tariff despite Mexico's collaboration in efforts to tackle drug smuggling. Sheinbaum accused Washington of publishing an offensive, defamatory, and also unsupported statement after the White House alleged that drug cartels operate unhindered due to an intolerable relationship with the government of Mexico. Her government would announce details of its response in Mexico City's main square on Sunday, according to the left-wing leader.
Razón ni justificación que soporte esta decisión que afectará a nuestros pueblos y naciones. Lo hemos dicho de diferentes formas. Cooperación y coordinación, sí. Subordinación, intervencionismo, no. A México se le respeta. Somos naciones iguales.
And now we go on a short break. And when we return, Serbia opposition disrupts parliament with flares, suspected tear gas. This and more when we get back. And welcome back. Now in the Middle East, the Israeli military has killed 4 Palestinians as it expanded its offensive in the occupied West Bank, currently in its 43rd day, to new parts of the northern city of Jenin. The military said that in an exchange of fire, troops killed a local Hamas leader along with another Palestinian militant and arrested 3 more. It said during a further inspection of the premises where the militants were, troops killed a 3rd armed militant who posed an immediate threat. The Palestinian Health Ministry identified the alleged Hamas leader as Asser Sadia, adding that his body was taken away by Israeli troops after he was shot dead in an eastern neighborhood in Jenin. In the early hours of Tuesday, the Palestinian Red Cross, or rather Red Crescent, said Israeli forces had handed over the body of another man in his 20s killed in East Jenin.
كان عندنا امبارح اجى عندنا زياره يعني كان مروح بده يطلع بالسياره هاي اجى وقف هون اتفاجئ بالجيش بكو قوات خاصه يعني اجى طخوا عليه اول رصاصه وقع على الارض بعدين فتحوا عليه اوتومات اجى صار يحبي جيت انا سحبته قال لي اسحبني جيت سحبته بعد ما سحبته جوا شايف نص الممر جوا عنا اجى الجب نزل من هون وفاتوا جوا صفوه مطرحهم.
اللي صار انه كنا بالدار قاعدين بامان الله، مره واحده فاتوا الجيش وصاروا ينادوا بالسماعات، نادوا علينا اول مره ما قدرناش عليهم، ودوا واحد من سكان العماره المجاوره انه اطلعوا خلال دقيقتين من
Serbian opposition lawmakers lit flares and discharged suspected tear gas during the opening day of the spring session of parliament on Tuesday in a sign of support for ongoing anti-corruption protests. A live video feed showed parliamentary speaker Ana Brnabic lambasting the opposition's protest and use of tear gas in the assembly. Serbia has been rocked for months by students-led anti-corruption protests following the fatal collapse of a train station roof last year that killed 15 people. The movement has put increasing pressure on the Serbian government and President Aleksandar Vučić, spurring the resignation of several high-ranking officials, including the Prime Minister, in January. Meanwhile, President of the Serbian National Assembly, Ana Brnabic, ordered the resumption of work in parliament after the disruption.
Skupština Republike Srbije će nastaviti da radi. Mi imamo posao koji moramo da završimo zbog građana Republike Srbije. Mi moramo da usvojimo zakon o visokom obrazovanju i time ispunimo studentske zahteve. Mi moramo da usvojimo zakon o jeftinim stambenim kreditima za mlade.
Spain's ruling Socialist Party has announced an agreement to delegate migration control responsibilities to Catalonia's regional administration. This move comes after extensive negotiations between the ruling Socialist Party and the pro-independence party Junts per Catalunya. El Maceiz, now Spain's Minister of Inclusion, defended the constitutionality of this agreement, stating that the decentralization of immigration powers aligns with Spain's legal framework. The development marks a significant shift in Spain's approach to regional autonomy and immigration policy, reflecting ongoing debates about the balance of power between national and regional governments.
El control de fronteras. Los Mossos d'Esquadra estarán y actuarán en fronteras en el marco de aplicación de las competencias de esta ley, en colaboración y en coordinación con el resto de fuerzas y cuerpos de seguridad del Estado. Mucho cuidado con el lenguaje. Estamos hablando de una delegación de competencias, no de cesión, sino que es una delegación de competencias que se contempla en el artículo 150.2 de la Constitución española.
The French Parliament has held a special session to pay tributes to Jean-Louis Debré, a prominent political figure who passed away at the age of 80. His family announced his death on Tuesday morning via LCI, the news channel led by his son, journalist Guillaume Debré. Now, Debré's distinguished career included roles as Minister of the Interior, President of the National Assembly, and President of the Constitutional Council. In honor of his significant contributions, members of Parliament observed a moment of silence, reflecting on Debré's enduring legacy in shaping modern French politics. As the nation mourns his passing, Jean-Louis Debré is remembered not only for his political insight, but also for his deep commitment to the values of democracy and public service that he championed throughout his life. Now, members of the Argentine community in Rome have prayed for Pope Francis's health as he remains hospitalized with double pneumonia. At Santa Maria Adolorata, the National Church for Argentines in Rome, special masses were held, drawing many who wished to support the pontiff during his illness. 88-year-old Pope Francis has been in Rome's Gemelli Hospital since February 14, receiving treatment for a severe lung infection. The Vatican reports that while his condition is critical, there have been slight improvements. As Pope Francis continues his recovery, both Argentines and the global community remain united in their hopes and prayers for his health.
Sa che la Chiesa intera prega e questa è una fortezza che lui riceve dallo Spirito Santo, la nostra preghiera. E questo, se lui lo vedesse, si dice così, non so parlare, mi dice dammi l'immagine.
Guatemalan soldiers have continued to patrol stretches of the border with Mexico near the Pacific Ocean under a plan aimed at deterring drug cartels. The military, backed by armored vehicles, patrol various points on the border at a daily basis. Now, this is under the Ring of Fire plan implemented by the Guatemalan government at the beginning of last year. Nearly 50 soldiers began their patrol on the beach and then advanced along the banks of the Suchiate River, the natural border between Guatemala and the southern Mexican state of Chiapas. The border between Guatemala and Mexico has been hit in recent decades by violence from organized crime, particularly drug trafficking gangs. Potential rains and an overflowing river from dense residential areas in East Jakarta causing thousands to be temporarily displaced. Thousands of houses have been affected, with floodwaters reaching 3-meter high in some areas, according to the Disaster Mitigation Agency. There are no immediate reports of casualties after the largest deluge, but parts of the city, home to around 11 million people, ground to a halt as whole neighborhoods were swamped in muddy waters. Heavy rains began on Monday, causing some flooding in Jakarta and nearby the cities of Bogor, Bekasi, and Tangerang. In Bogor, more than 300 people were evacuated, dozens of houses were damaged, and one bridge collapsed. And that's all on Beyond the Continent this evening. To remember, you can watch News Central live on DSTV channel 422, Star Times channel 274, Avo TV, and of course on YouTube. Many thanks for watching. My name is Mazino Appeal.